unmute to ask the question, that's fine too, and I'll call on you. Let me just get this up and going. Oh, come on, thing. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay. All right, perfect. So today we are going to talk all about Kidlit, and it is such a wonderful space to be a part of. I'm honored to be a part of it. And so today it's going to be an overview. It's going to be really quick in terms of all these different pockets, because one of the most wonderful things about children's literature is that we have films for kids, we have plays for kids, we have poetry collections or novel and verse, we have all of these different things, nonfiction, fiction. And so there are lots of spaces where we can go into with children's literature. And one thing that I want to say, just really up front, is if we were to take a second and just think about a book from our childhood, a book that spoke to us for some reason. I would love for you to put it in the chat if you have one that pops in your mind. But the thing about Kidlit that's so powerful, and it's kind of like we hold a little bit of magic, because those books you don't ever forget. Those are the books that start you on your reading journey for life. And so it is an immense honor to write for kids. It is a ginormous challenge to write for kids, but it's also a wonderful space because in Kidlit, so many envelopes are being pushed, so many pockets and so many boxes and so many things are being challenged and considered. One of the reasons there's so much book banning is because we are telling so much truth in so many different ways, whether it's in a fantasy story or nonfiction, it doesn't matter. So today, I hope you will put that hat on that says, what is that Kidlit story that I have in me? And I'm going to talk a little bit on the personal note in a second, so you'll really understand why I'm saying this with all of my heart. So let's get started. So when we think of writing just in general, E.B. White said, a writer has the duty to be good, not lousy, true, not false, lively, not dull, accurate, not full of error. He should tend to lift people up, not lower them down. Writers do not merely reflect and interpret life, they inform and shape life. And one of the most powerful things, again, is that we are shaping young lives when we are creating our stories. Whether it is a fantasy in a world that we have totally created from our head, there is some level of truth that we are speaking about in our story that reflects society today, right? We all do that. But for children, it's really powerful because it might be their first glimpse into it. And so I'm going to step back really quick for 1 second and kind of introduce myself in a little bit more in-depth way, so you kind of understand why my love of children's literature and why my hope that you all have something percolating possibility in your head. So I'm on the Writing for Children faculty, but I also attended Spalding. And when I first applied to Spalding, it was for fiction. And so my first semesters at Spalding were in fiction. I had no thoughts about writing for children whatsoever. It didn't even occur to me. The stuff that I was writing had no business being in a children's book, right? So I was going about my business. Yes, I'm looking at some of the titles that are popping up, and these are still beloved books by so many today. And if you go back and read those books and you ask yourself, why did that book really resonate with me? Why do I remember it? Is it something that I've shared with my kids, my grandkids, whatever it might be? Those books really hold power. And so for me, when one of the Writing for Children faculty members came to me and said, Leah, I think you have a couple of Kidlit stories in you, and you should try writing for children. And I basically told her, yeah, not so much. Yeah, what I'm writing is definitely not for kids. I'm not going to say I was totally closed off to it, because I'm kind of one of those people that will try anything at least once. But I hesitated for a minute, and then I said, you know what? This is why you're in school. This is why you're here. You're here to stretch and grow and learn and be afraid in a very safe space. So I went on this journey in Kidlit, not knowing anything. I was clueless. I only thing I had in my mind was I liked folk tales and I liked fables and I liked things like that. So that's kind of where I started. But one of the wonderful things about the Kidlit community is it's a embracing community, and so many people started giving me book ideas and all of this kind of stuff, and were really supportive. Then I happened to go on a trip in Senegal, West Africa, and I saw this little boy sitting on a wall. And as all of you know, we have packets due. When you have a packet due, whether you're on vacation or not, you got work to do. And so I wrote a little story about this little boy. I had never been to Senegal in my life, wrote this little story about this boy, and I sent it in as part of my packet. And my writing for children professor said, Leah, this is the start of a novel. And I said, not so much by me. It's not going to happen. And she really, really, really didn't give up on me. And a number of people did not give up on me, especially Leslie Newman, who kind of poked me after I graduated and said, what's happening with that novel? And so that novel became my debut middle grade novel that came out in 2017. And so one of the reasons I am saying to you as I go through this presentation to think about your childhood, think about the questions that you would have loved to have answered, whether it was in a story form, whether it was in a nonfiction form, whatever it might be. Think about if there's anything percolating, but also just to understand the breadth of what children's literature is all about, so that when you go into the readings for the residency, you'll have a better understanding of what all the excitement is for. So here we go. So after that book in 2017 that came out from Simon and Schuster, I was really fortunate and blessed to continue to write stories. So I write picture books, both fiction and nonfiction. I write middle grade. I also dabble in YA short stories and just do a number of other things. And all of this started because I was in a workshop at Spalding, running my mouth, not even know what I said, that professor was like, you know what, you should give it a try. And I am so grateful that I did, because I am every day I kind of pinch myself that I get to do this for a living. And so we are going to dive in and we're going to learn all about certain pockets of the Kidlit space. Okay, so really brief history of it all. So 16th century and before, there was really no distinction between children's literature and adult literature, right? Like things like Aesop's fables, they weren't written for kids. And a lot of stories that were written were kind of dark in their lessons and things like that. And kids were seen primarily as little adults, right? They were working, they were doing things that were outside of the home. A number of them were not literate. So this was not a true focus. And then you push forward to the 18th century, right? And then there was this distinct emergence of, okay, wait a second, we have a more literate childhood population. So let's think about this. And a man named John Newbery started a publishing company for children. And he saw that middle class folks could afford to buy books for their kids. So he started focusing on it. But one of the things that was still very crucial in this separation, it was still a tool for teaching. Before that, it had been a lot of religious undertones and things like that were happening in the writing. But at this point, he also said, let's figure out a way to delight and instruct. Okay, so he added a little bit of a twist. So the books weren't as didactic, they weren't as heavy-handed in the morals, but they still were there, right? And so you still had that very present. And then we come to the 19th century, which is the golden age of children's literature. It's where books were created specifically for enjoyment. And they broke into our imaginations in ways that, if you think about yourself as a kid, all the things that you used to believe and imagine and create. And so that's when that really started happening. So we had different kinds of things. So we had crossover titles like Robinson Crusoe and Gulliver's Travels. They were not written for children. They were written for adults, but they were enjoyed by kids, right? You had the revival of folk tales at this time. So this oral tradition was now getting written down, right? So you were starting to see these stories out and about. They still had the lessons that they had during the oral tradition where they scared the bejesus out of most of the kids that read them. If you go back and read some of those early Grimm's fairy tales and all of those, they are scary, right? And you're thinking that, oh, these are kids. No, 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 no. They were scary and made you not want to do a whole bunch of things. And that's what their intent was. It was to scare you. And to keep you in line because they thought kids were kind of loosey-goosey sometimes and needed to be held down and reprimanded and told all the horrible truths of the world. And then you also had these books that were adventure and domestic stories, and they separated girls and boys, right? Girls had a very domestic leaning in the stories that they were being told about what they could do. And while boys had adventure stories, they also had some more practical stories as well, but they got a little bit more of the imagination in theirs. And so I'm just giving you I'm going to give you some lists. So you can just look at, I think it's always fascinating to kind of look at when books popped on the scene. And one of the ones, the first one was really a picture. It was pictures and a couple of letters to kind of illustrate different things in religious society and things like that was one of those first it was more of a textbook than really a book for enjoyment. And then you kind of go down and then you see John Newbery started creating these little pretty pocket books. But the first true book that's considered to be for children, full of heart, imagination, and joy is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in 1865. And so after that, you start seeing some other ones that are popping up. And you keep going into the second golden age, where you have the Wizard of Oz and Anne of Green Gables and Velveteen Rabbit and Winnie the Pooh. And then you have this other distinction that happens not until 1962 when you see your first Black character on the cover of a book, right? And it took that long for that to happen, but it started a conversation in a very small way. It took a very long time for it to get larger, but it cracked open something that said, this book did a lot of things really wonderfully. And on top of that, it had a little Black boy on the cover that didn't deter any of the wonderfulness, which is what people always assumed would happen. And so it really was speaking to a conversation that had not started yet in mainstream. And so that happened in 1962. But when you really think about what shook up the children's book space, it was not until 1998 when Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone stepped on the scene. The reason it really shook things up, not only was the first book was shorter than the other ones, but not only were readers coming out in droves on the first nights to get these books, they were cash cows for the publisher. And once something becomes a cash cow for a publisher, they're like, oh, wait, really? Kids read this, adults read this. And so that really broke open how they looked at middle grade reading books for kids, which is like 8 to 13-year-olds, and how they looked at children's books in general, and where they started to pool their funds to create this space that really took off after that. And it is still different pockets. It has its webs and flows, right, of what's big. So some years it feels like YA is everywhere, and then other years it feels like middle grade. And then picture books they stay pretty strong throughout the course of it all. But this is really when things shook up. Okay, so we're going to look at different categories a little bit more in depth. But the first, we have the board books, right? The cardboard ones that babies can chew on. Got those. Got picture books, right? So they can be anywhere from 32 to 48 is the general page count of a picture book. Picture books can range in word count, and we're going to get into that in a little while, but they're typically from ages 4 to 8. But I dare you to tell me an adult who has not picked up a picture book sometime and been like, oh my goodness, I did not know that. Or, oh my gosh, that was beautiful. Or, mommy, why are you crying? Okay, that's all I'm going to say. So that's picture books. So for all ages. So then we have transitional readers, which kids are just starting to be able to read on their own, but they're no longer in books that have specifications of like the words that need to be used, right? You have illustrations to go along with the pictures that help you figure it out on your own. So you have transitional readers, and then you have middle grade. Okay, so 8 to 12, there's upper and lower middle grade as well. And like I said, we're going to go into this, all of this a little bit more in depth, but I just want to give you a kind of an overview. Then you have young adults, which is 13 to 18, but there are so many crossover titles in young adult. And there are a number of titles that some people don't even know are young adult books, but they are. And sometimes it's because the subject matter is pushing certain envelopes, or it's just that it has such popularity, people just assumed for whatever reason. And then you have graphic novels. And so we are going to look at a couple of these forms right now. And we're going to start with picture books. And like I said, for all ages, this is the lovely Leslie Newman's picture book, Sparkle Boy, that is all about a little boy who obviously wants to sparkle. And so this is a big book for LGBTQ and I plus, and I think it starts lots of conversations in really wonderful ways. And Leslie kind of was on the forefront of starting these conversations. And so that's something that books can do. Books for kids can do. They can push the envelope. They can say things that adult books still don't have the courage to say. And what makes them so profound is we have to usually say it in less than 500 words, right? So you're thinking like, so the poets out there understand exactly what I mean. No word is wasted, right? It might take you a month to figure out one sentence, right? So you're really, really, really diving in and thinking about what are the exact words that you need to say and what are the possibility for illustration, because unless you're an author illustrator, the publisher will hire someone to do the art and they will take your words, and 9 times out of 10, you all will never meet, you will never talk. So they are taking your words and they are creating something on top of your words to create this collaboration that's wonderful. A really dear friend of mine who is an illustrator, and we worked on a book together, but before that, he said to me one day, and this is something that I'll never forget. He said, you know what? This is what you need to remember. You bring the sand to the sandbox, and then I create the castles out of the sand that you gave me. And that is when you create this magical thing. And so you have to trust that I'm going to make some really cool castles out of the sand that you provided. And so that has been in my brain for my whole entire life. And I think, especially when I look at picture books or any kind of illustrated book at all, I'm always thinking, have I put in the right sand? Right? Is there different sand that I could have used to give them more options, more opportunities, more moments where their curiosity was just piqued and exploded? And so think about those things. And I know that you all are going to be doing picture books during the residency, I believe. So if you are, think about that. Think about what are the exact words that you need so that somebody can create these beautiful castles if you are not also an illustrator. So we're going to do just really quickly different types of picture books that there are. You know, you have the classic picture book. You know, there's a problem and there's a character that's going to solve it. One of the things with picture books, while there are certain picture books that do feature adults solving the problems, especially when you're looking at biographies or something like that, or in some books where you have an adult character, they have some sense of childhood about them. Okay, so you really want the child to solve the problems. And if you can get rid of the adults from even kind of, I'm not going to say being in the book because I'm very family oriented. So one of the things that I always got as a complaint, you have too many people, you have too many grown-ups, too many family members, but I'm like, you cannot live in my life without adults in it. So I just couldn't see not having that, but you always have to remember that the child is at the center. So you also have circular books, right? Where your main character is taking a journey, but they're coming back to the same place. You have timeline books, right? Life stories, sequence of events, seasons, or birth to death stories. A lot of our biographies and nonfiction books would be in this space. You also have alphabet books. There are so many different types of alphabet books, and it's like really another alphabet book, but if you can find an original way to share the alphabet, there is still space for that book. Counting books, the same. There's so many of them, but if you can find a new and unique way to share counting with kids, there's space for it. Question and answer books are really big as well. And all of these books, I think one of the main things to remember with picture books, for the most part, kids are being read to. So you don't have to be so careful with your language as long as you are giving enough sand so that your illustrator can make sand castles that also tell the story, right? And some picture books tell an opposite story in the illustrations than they do in the words, right? And that is generally for comedic purposes, but that is also a possibility. But think about how text and illustration would play. So even if you are not the illustrator, always recommend for any writing that we do to read widely and to look at how other people are doing it, and to think about how you can push against that and do more or do something different. So these are just some picture books that I think have done some things really, really well. And you can grab them, whether it's a biography, whether it's about the first day of school, right? Whether it's about going on strike for climate change, whether it's about an alphabet book that's all about activism, right? There's Water Protectors is all about Native Americans and water rights. So there are so many different things that you can write about. If you can figure it out, you can write it. And I will say, just on a personal note, I came across a news article one day, and actually, it wasn't, that's not true. What I came across first was a photograph, and it was a photograph of some Black kids standing in a field with an American flag. And I was so curious about what this photograph had to do with. So I looked on the internet and it kept saying it was about such and such. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem right. So I live in Washington, D.C. So I went to the Library of Congress. Librarians are, I mean, they are just the thing. Let me just tell you. So I had this picture sitting on my table, and you're not supposed to bring paper clips and all these things in, but I never know how to follow directions. And I had a little paper clip on the corner of my photograph. And this librarian strolled over, and they had told me to go look at the catalogs. It was like this wall of catalogs, and they told me to go look over there. And I go over there and I look. Oh my goodness. She comes to the desk, and I think she was wooed by the paperclip. And she says to the other librarians, "Do you know where this picture is from? I bet you don't." And they like played a game. She knew exactly where it was from, the date of the picture. She knew all the things about this picture. And I'm gonna show you the picture. But the reason I'm telling you this is because this story is about the first Memorial Day, but it's about these men that went and dug up a mass grave and made individual plots, to bury fallen Union soldiers. And I'm sure you're thinking in your head, Leah, that is absolutely a picture book. So this is the picture that I saw. And I know you're like, this is absolutely a picture book, but this is the thing about a picture book. You can cover any topic that you want to. It's just about the way in which you come into the story. So I wrote this story called A Day for Remembering, and I got into it by thinking of a little boy who would actually tell the story. So if there's a story bubbling in your head and you're thinking, wait, this is too adult, well, bring it down. Bring it down and think about how you could tell it for a kid. Does that mean introducing a new character? Does that mean, changing the focus to on the page and off the page? But think about all of that when you think about picture books. And so these are some of the elements that we are always constantly thinking about when we think about our picture book texts, right? Emotion is huge. It's the first thing on my list because that is the thing that at the end of the day, picture books are meant to be read again and again and again. And if we're not feeling, if we're not connected, if we're not caring about, it's not going to happen. And that applies to both fiction and nonfiction. And so these are some of the things that you really want to think about when you think about picture books. And so really quickly, we're going to look at the setup one. This is a really great picture book that came out called Night Owl. And it actually starts, he is an author illustrator, so it gives him a little leeway into kind of how he really wants to visualize. But the story actually starts on the title page. When you look at this page, as a kid, if you can't read the words, you're looking at all the things in this room, and everything in this room says something about knights and dragons. It is a marker to what this story is about. It is a setup for this story. And then the story begins. Since the day he hatched, Owl had one wish. Remember, economy of words, to be a knight. And so if you even look at the scale of the owl and the knight in the picture, and you think about how you set up your story, there are so many ways somebody could have said this in a wordier way, but this is all that we needed, right? Another setup. This is a story about a girl who is really reluctant about her family's history and her family's past. And so you have the past where they are doing something that her ancestors did while they still lived in China, which was collect watercress from the side of the road. And so this is the setup of this book. It's bringing you from present to past, and it's going to weave it together beautifully. And so if you have a story from your childhood that has that, or from grandparents or other ancestors that you can think of a way to weave in, this is an excellent mentor text for something like that. And then just in general, when you think about writing picture books, the most important thing to remember is to keep it really simple. And what I mean by simple is not talking down to kids or anything like that. One moment, focus on that one moment, that one beat, that one feeling, that one experience. You can stretch out that experience, but you start with one. It doesn't need subplots. It doesn't need all of this stuff. And so you think about, when you think about a picture book, you think about one moment. So this is from my picture book, The Courage of the Little Hummingbird. And this picture book is all about a little hummingbird doing all it can to save its forest home in a raging fire. And the one thought I had is about that one little drop of water that you see against this big raging fire. And that became the whole kind of focus for me and how I told the story. So think of that one image and then work around that image and what is outside the frame of that image to tell it from start to finish, or however you want to tell that story. Okay, so that's picture books. Lots could have been discussed about picture books, but I'm trying to do this quick and dirty. So the next one, middle grade. This is my happy place. Middle grade, 8 to 12-year-olds. My brain stuck in this space, so I love middle grade. Middle grade is one of those spaces where curiosity is at the front of everything, and there's so much that is unknown and undiscovered that you can push at and explore. And so when you think about middle grade, here are some amazing middle grade books that are out and about in the world, whether it's a novel in verse, whether it's fantasy, whether it's magical realism, whether it's talking about, let's see, history as in wartime, whether it's talking about disfigurement, whether it's talking about being felt unmoored in your new home if you're an immigrant. It has just all of these different, whether it's you're on Mars as the rover. There are just a lot of different things that you can explore in the middle grade space. It's just a matter of how you tell the story. And for middle grade, voice is really key in figuring that out, not just what you're pinpointing in the story. And so markers of middle grade, 8 to 12. Average age of the protagonist is older. Kids like to read up, right? So when you're thinking about your stories, kids like to read a little bit older. Average word count, I'm going to say this with a caveat, 20K to 60K. Really try to stay in that pocket. Nowadays, the books are becoming shorter, but a book needs to be as long as it needs to be, period. I don't care what anybody says, a book needs to be as long as it needs to be. I will say, so my first book, I sold it at 60,000 words. It came out, it was 95,000 words, but that was my editor's doing, not mine. Yeah, right. Not mine. So it is possible, but this is the space to stay in. And so if you can think about just really tight, I still haven't managed this on myself, but the pocket, the sweet spot is like 45 to 55K. Okay. Some common themes: overcoming obstacles, friendship, self identity, navigating their own world, right? Being an underdog is a huge one. Loyalty, courage. If you think of some of the books that you might have put in the chat, or if you think of some of the books that are really popular now, these are some themes that are popping up again and again and again. There are a number of other themes as well. Okay. So in great middle grade, you have a diverse range of character emotion, first of all, but you have a diverse range of characters. And so you have lower middle grade books that will tackle certain topics, and you have upper middle grade, which my debut novel was upper middle grade. The publishers had wanted it to be YA, but I had fought for it to be middle grade because my character, he was a kid. And while the stuff that he was experiencing was very much adult, he was a kid. And so it doesn't, so for me, it was really important for them to understand that there are kids that experience this at every age. And this is where I need it to be because I'm speaking to this kid. And so what that meant was certain things had to come off the page, but they were still present. And so when you're thinking about some of the tougher topics that you might want to explore, if you're exploring it in middle grade, um, it might need to come off the page in a more creative way. So that is a possibility as well. But I will say this: stick to your guns. You know your characters, you know your stories, fight for them. But that also means if you're not doing it right, you still got to do some work, right? It doesn't mean that you have it right. It just means that this is where you feel it needs to be, and you need to do it in a way that proves that. And so think about that as well. Series are really big in middle grade. Kids gobble them up, just like they do in transitional readers. They gobble those up as well. Middle grade covers so many different pockets, whether it's historical, whether it's retellings, mysteries, nonfiction. There's a little bit of innocent romance. There's all of these possibilities in middle grade. Okay, so a lot of growing up stories, first experience stories, first crushes, all of these things. And it's the start of independence, right? So a lot of the stories don't feature adults roaming around the page. And so you can think about that as well. And they can explore some really tough, tough, tough topics. And it's just the way that they explore them. Okay. And again, the kid needs to solve the problem. And for middle grade, if it's outside of if it's in, if it's not fantasy per se, it's generally close to home, close to the neighborhoods, those types of stories. Or if they are going outside of those spaces, they're with their friends or some family member, so they're near that nucleus of family, whether it's found family or the family they were born into. The other thing about, and we won't read it, but this is a really great middle grade when it comes to voice from the very first page. And I can't say enough when we talk about voice, it is the way that your character experiences the world. So when you think about creating voice for your characters, think about what they notice in the world and think about how you can use that to describe whatever it is that they're describing, even if it has nothing to do with that thing. And that's how you are going to come to a really authentic voice for your character. And if you ever have time, I encourage you to pick up Counting by Sevens, because it really does voice well. And one of the things that I always, when I do voice lectures, highlight the vocabulary just on this first page that speaks to the specificity of who this little girl is and how she experiences and sees the world. And when you think about voice in that way, it can help you in so many ways. So I highly recommend this one. And then I put this one up because this is one that is talking about a very tough topic. So this is a kid who is moving away from his town. No internet, no telephones, no television, no touch point to the outside world at all. Do you all think this kid is going to be excited about moving here? Most people would say no, but this is the thing. This kid is absolutely thrilled to be moving to this pocket where there is no communication at all. Because why? He is the sole survivor of a school shooting. And this story is told in a very kind of like, it's humorous, it's heartfelt, But at the core of the story, you're talking about a sole survivor of a school shooting. It is brilliantly done. And so, again, when you think about the types of stories that you can tell in middle grade, in picture books, in young adults, it's just about the way that you approach it and you come to the story. So that's another great one to pick up to see how it's pushing the envelope in that way. And then so young adults, 13 to 18 and beyond. So I'm sure some of these titles you might have seen before. A number of a number of young adult books get turned into movies, and different TV shows and different things like that. And so they have a lot of crossover appeal in the young adult space. They are also pushing the envelope in ways that I don't know that adult writing is often doing, just because we take for granted that we can say whatever we want to say, right? When we're writing in adult spaces sometimes. And I think when you're writing for young people, you still have to remember that there has to be some kernel of not necessarily that it has to be hope or optimistic, but there has to be, with the truth, we still have to deliver it in a way that we can still breathe at the end of it and say maybe we will be okay. But it could be gut wrenching, right? So you have all of these different types of young adult stories. And so target age, like I said, 12 to 18, but widely read across the board. For young adults, it's really tricky because that 13-year-old does not really necessarily need to be reading certain things for an older YA market. So it's a fuzzy space for the younger readers, who are avid readers and they're getting their hands on some stuff that they might not be ready for. But I like to think about it in the same ways that I think about picture books. So picture books have layers to me, right? They have the layer where the kid comes in and understands the story. They have the layer where the adult reader who's reading the story understands the story. Then you have a child reader who might be reading the story and can also interpret the pictures. They come at it from a different level. And so picture books are juggling all of these different spaces to make an interesting and engaging story for each of those levels, but in different ways. And as someone gets older, they may break into that next level of understanding. And I feel that can be true for a number of YA titles as well. Kids can read them, totally miss certain parts of the book because they're not ready for that yet, right? They're not their brains are not open to all of that yet. And so if they come back and read it later, they're like, oh wait, that's so that's another possibility when you think about YA. Again, reading up in age, so you want your protagonist to be older than the child reader. Okay, so the average word count for these, and again, this stuff it waffles, but young adult pretty much has stayed true. It's middle grade that's kind of shifted to shorter books, but fantasies, just like an adult, can stretch a lot longer. And for YA, a number of themes again are self-discovery, family, conflict, politics, social justice, morality, race, sexuality, mental health, friendship, grief, class differences. So there are a lot of things that you can touch on in the YA space. Okay. So YA is not a genre, it's an audience, right? So many different genres are explored within the YA space. So you can have fantasy, you can have romance, you can have thrillers, you can have mystery, you can have horror, you can have mainstream. And so, again, as I said in the beginning, think about some of the stories that you might have percolating in your brain and think about, is there a kid who could tell that story in a way that would make it different, cool, push against something, could bring in some fantastical elements or whatever it might be. Is there something that you really are curious about or something that you really want to talk about and explore? Think about having a kid who's discovering that for the first time and how they navigate that space. Okay, so the main character is often a teen, and it should a lot of YA is about self. And so it's a lot of internal thoughts, right? And concerns and motivations and their experiences. And it's a lot about me, me, me. That's why a number of them are written in first person. But they don't have to be. They do not have to be angsty, right? They don't have to be any of those things. They can be, and there are a number that are for sure, but there are also some that are not in any way. There are quiet middle grade novels. I mean, I see my brain stuck in middle grade. There are quiet young adult novels, right? There are young adult novels that have a whole bunch of stuff going on, especially in the fantasy space. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think one of the really wonderful things about this, there's really no rules if you can do it well. And I think that that goes for anything in the kidlit space. There are some books where you're like, how the heck did that get published? Or you think about it and you're like, now I understand why that, when you get to the end of the book, you're like, oh, I get it. I get it. They did something really different in a very cool way. And hopefully kids will appreciate that. Okay. There's often a sense of urgency. So it's usually in the moment, right? YA is very much in the now of things. Lot, like I said, a lot of first person happens in YA, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. Um, and they're moving towards their independence because after YA, there's something called new adult where they're in college or just out of college. That's another possibility for story. All training wheels are off in new adult. You can pretty, there's no like true censorship at all in that space. It just is kind of giving you almost the permission to say, okay, now I don't even have to think about how I'm going to say it. I can just say it. 'Cause it's just that the protagonist is a certain age. And so then you also have that space you can explore. But it feels new adult feels like it's still within the kidlit world though. Um, Okay, so it's balancing freedom and responsibility. This is a really wonderful book that's pushing a whole bunch of different envelopes. It came out, I want to say it was 2015, but I just think it's one of these ambitious projects that just clicked. It worked really well, and it's about a boy. Two boys. The older one starts dating a girl that just turned up in their barn one day, and the younger one sees her get kidnapped, but he cannot recognize faces. So he is unable to describe who took the girl. But no one quite believes that she just didn't leave this kind of town that everybody leaves. And it's filled with mystery, a little bit of romance, magical realism, and it's just a really wonderfully crafted book. And so I encourage you to go check this one out. Okay, so when we think about YA, the defining characteristics of YA literature is emotional truth. Even if we're not the same as the characters we read, they are all dealing with things, issues of who they are, who they should be, what they should and shouldn't do, that we all deal with in their own ways. With the Hunger Games, even if we will never be in Katniss's shoes, the decisions she makes make emotional sense to us, even when she makes the wrong ones. And I think that that is the point of when you are writing for children, like I said before with picture books and with middle grade as well, I think I said it, the emotion. If we do not care, if we do not feel some level of understanding or connection about their base emotions, we haven't gotten there yet, especially with kids' books. We just haven't gotten there yet. And that's what you're trying to tap into. That's where you're trying to get to, even if it's a situation that you would never be a part of or something that you would never understand. Um, uh, a professor named Rudine Sims Bishop always talks about mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. And it's really speaking about getting to the heart and the emotion, not just so we can see ourselves doing things that we also already understand and identify with, but so that others can see them and understand them in their own way as well. And this is really crucial, whether she was speaking primarily about books written for children of color, but I think it goes across the board when it comes to what's at the core of writing for kids. kids want to identify so wholeheartedly with who they're reading, whether it is they understand their situation or not, but they can understand what it means to feel sad. They can understand what it means to feel fear, right? They can understand what it means to feel love. And so that's what you're trying to get at, even if your story has nothing to do with this planet and it started in your imagination. All of your characters need at some level to be at the heart of your reader. And that's when you find success in the kidlit space. Okay, so the final one that we're going to do, and then I'm going to open it up if you have some questions, is graphic novels. Graphic novels been on the scene, comic books have been on the scene forever, but they literally took off um like in the last 10 years, really and truly took off. So many books are being turned into graphic novels, whether they are classics, whether they are books that just came out a couple of years ago, whether they are, new books on the scene. So here are a number of graphic novels, and they're pushing all kinds of envelopes in this space as well. They're talking about so many different topics. And so graphic novels are also an interesting space, especially for playwrights and screenwriters who are already kind of writing in that form. It's a great space. And there are a number. I know that a few years ago we did American Born Chinese. There are just so many wonderful titles within this space. So, a graphic novel as a longer format comic is not a genre or type of story, but rather a medium or vessel for telling stories in sequential art form. Within that form, there are numerous types of stories that can be told inside a graphic novel. So, this was based on a novel, right? A very popular novel, and they turned it into a graphic novel for younger readers. And so it was an adult book that was turned into a graphic novel. So, I mean, there are just so many different ways you can come to stories for children. One of the things I do recommend, especially when it's books that are being converted for adult audiences to child, read both of them. Right. So go get the novel that was first created, read that, and then pick up the graphic novel and see in what things they paid attention to change for the child market, right? For the young adult market. And I think that can be a really great mentoring text, side by side parallel, and things to think about if you want to step into that space, if you want to engage in that space in some way. So there are a number of books out there that, whether they were turned into graphic novels or just young adult books or middle grade, right? There are a few books that have, and more than a few books that have been rewritten by people in the kidlit community from adult spaces, from books in adult spaces. And so you can just look at what they paid attention to and what they changed and what they kept the same, and how that conversation is going to happen in the kidlit space as opposed to the adult space. Okay. So graphic novel is a complete story told through a combination of words and pictures, right? Whether it's standalone or a limited series, a graphic novel will take a reader through the whole journey of a story. Okay. Writing moves the story along. The art style makes readers linger on the page. Graphic novels tell complete stories, whereas comics and manga, they can be in installments, right? So you're not getting the whole thing when you pick up that comic. Word balloons are what a speaker is saying, right? Graphic novels need compelling settings. Think about that again when I talked about the picture books and you brought the sand, and we're going to build the castles. One thing about graphic novels is you want to engage the eye at all times. When you are when a reader is reading these books, right? And then the heroes and villains, they evolve. So like sometimes with comics, they stay the same. But in graphic novels, it's more like a novel in that way. Um, you can have superhero stories, autobiographical stories, historical stories, all the things, right? Graphic novel elements are similar to everything from picture books to video games to traditional prose. So there is lots of space to explore in graphic novels. And like I said, they are huge right now. They are extremely popular. And so this is an award-winning graphic novel memoir that came out. I think it won like I don't know, 25 awards. It's super popular. He is an amazing guy, and he just wrote about his childhood. And so you think about some of the stories of your past, right? Are there certain things that you could touch point and speak to for a child reader that they could understand and identify with? And so this is a perfect example of that. Now he is the illustrator as well, but still it's a different way he did the graphic novel. It does have panels in certain places, and then it has more looser forms like this. But the story is really engaging, really interesting. And even though I didn't grow up in a family experience like this, there are points of it where you're like, oh my goodness, yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Or, oh my gosh, how mortifying would that be, right? You completely can identify. So, again, think about your own stories. Think about how you can either bring them, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it doesn't matter. I think for me, a lot of the time, while I'm working on something now that it's probably the closest touch point to me, but for the most part, all of my stories have some inkling of me in them, right? Something that I hold dear. In my debut novel, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no clue about children's books, first of all. But the other thing, I just didn't know how to write this kid. But guess what? I loved soccer when I was a little kid, right? And so my kid at the start of that book, Leah, probably read 200 pages of him playing soccer. Um, and so that's how I started that story. But the wonderful thing about that is I could let my brain rest in terms of thinking about soccer because I know soccer inside and out. And what that allowed me to do was it allowed me to see what kind of kid he was on the soccer field. Is he arrogant? Is he kind of like the team leader? Like what kind of kid he is? Who are his friends? Who are his enemies? And that helped to inform the story that I created. And so, just for all of us, when we think about the stories that we're writing, if we get stuck, something you love or something you hate, because you know that well too, start there and move out from that to create the stories that you want to tell. So this is a great graphic novel memoir. And just in general, when it comes to Kidlit, children's literature must build a bridge between the colorful dream world full of fantasy and illusion and a tougher real world full of twists and turns. The child armed with the torch of knowledge, awareness, and guidance must cross this bridge and set foot to the intense harshness of the bigger world. And that's the thing. We are really trying to equip them for the world that they are going to be a part of. And we do not need to do that in a didactic, heavy handed way, right? We can slip in some really profound guiding information in funny ways, in heartfelt ways, right? In the most unexpected ways. And I think that that is the beauty of Kidlit. You are stretching your brain, you are stretching your imagination to figure out the best way to tell different and compelling stories. And I'll leave you with this spread, which I think is just a great spread. It says, this is about, this is from a book called The Story of a Story. And of course, you bring your eyes and ears, nose and fingers. You bring your mind and heart, your endless curiosity, a deep longing to create, to write, to say something about the world, to tell a story. You bring all the invisible things that make you, you. And that's what we need to do whenever we write a story, whether it is for adults or whether it's for children. Bring your whole self to that story because those are the stories that are really going to resonate because they speak a truth in a way that no one else can speak your truth. And so, again, picture books are profound, people. So I'm going to end on that note. We have a couple of minutes left. I hope if anyone has any questions, you can either raise your hand or you can put them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer. Let me unshare that. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna go with the last one first. How does the graphic novel writer build it if they are not illustrating? Can it be a storyboarded? Okay, so if you're doing a graphic novel, you can honestly think about it like a script, like like somebody who's writing a screenplay for the most part. I think the difference is when you're doing a graphic novel, you need to have a pretty good sense of how many panels you want on a page, or if you want it more loosely done. There are a number of resources online, whether it's videos, short little videos. This one woman who had oh gosh, and I just looked at it the other day for a workshop that I'm doing. It's just on YouTube. Her book just came out, but if you look for graphic novel, like how to write a graphic novel if you're not an illustrator, it's just like a 5-minute video, and she kind of shows you her layout, because you can do it a number of different ways, but it shows you kind of like the really important beats that you and the language that you need. But beyond that, you can do it in a number of different ways. So if you are not an illustrator, you're basically making sure that you are describing what's going to be seen in each panel, and what dialogue or sound effects or whatever. But if you just go online, you can find a number of them, and you can look at adult ones too. But there are a number of manuscripts for graphic novels online. Okay. Do you see most novels were mostly falling in YA space or middle grade space? Oh my goodness, novels and verse are all over the place. They are all over the place. They're in picture, like even though it's a novel and verse, there are picture books that follow that frame. So they are heavier text and they have spot illustrations. You find them a lot in middle grade because it's an encouragement for kids to see all that white space on the page, for one, but also they're beautiful, right? And some of them are just, they're done so, so well. But kids are always feel accomplished when they finish them. So there are lots in middle grade, but there are also a lot of them in YA as well. So they cover all spaces. Okay, I'm curious about how you would differentiate young adult and junior fiction. I'm not sure I know what junior fiction is. I don't know what that term is. Who can you like explain where you heard it? Junior fiction. And I'll come back to you because I've never heard the term before, but that's not saying anything because goodness. Okay. What have you found to be the most unexpected part of writing and publication process for children's books? So for picture books, I will say the wait. Picture books, you can sell a picture book and the book might not come out for 5 years, might not come out for 10 years, because you might be waiting for an illustrator, especially if it's an illustrator that you wanted. Like I have a book called, wait, where is it? I have a book, this book right here, that's Your Voice, Your Vote. I sold this book in 2018. It came out last year, but I really wanted this illustrator, so I was willing to wait. So that's one of the biggest frustrations is there's a lot of waiting, and then all of a sudden you have to like hurriedly do, and be ready to do, and pivot. And because I write in all different spaces, the other thing that's hard for me personally is keeping my head on straight because I have 13 different publishers. And so one publisher does not care that my other book is due. So I have to be very like I have to be very organized in my own ways. And while you're at Spalding, I cannot encourage you enough to figure out the ways in which you organize and think best. And because when it's stress time, you already need those tools in place. It's hard to kind of build those tools while you're stressed out. And so while you're at Spalding, not saying that you can't be stressed out, but this is the time to experiment with different ways to do stuff and figure out what really works for you, because you can hear 12 different authors and they're going to say 12 different things. And so this is the time to experiment with it and figure out what you would really want. Okay, let's see. I appreciate your enthusiasm for the subject is inspiring. Now I need to find that truth of mine. How do, oh my goodness. I'm one of those people that has more topics than I have time to write them. But the thing about that is not all of them rise to the surface. So it's the ones that keep coming back to you again and again and again. And you know how when you're out and about and you notice something over and over again, but it's because your brain is now tuned to notice it. That's kind of the books that I tend to focus on, are the ones that I'm out in the world and I'm like, oh, that character with it. My brain is tuned to their story. And so those are the ones that I generally spend the time trying to figure out. Okay, do you ever get young adults to read your books before publication? I guess I'm curious if you're, okay. Yes. Especially for my debut novel, I paid a young man to read my book after I had already paid a number of sensitivity readers who read for content because I'm not Senegalese. I'm also not Muslim. I wanted to make sure that I was not not messing things up any more than I was already messing them up. And this one boy who I paid, who out of everybody else found the one thing that would have destroyed me, I named a goat after a famous prophet. And he was the only one that told me that. So he was worth every penny. So yes, I do have readers read stuff for me, especially when I just really don't know what I'm talking about. Let's see. And the last one in the library at my school, there was a junior fiction distinction. Oh, okay. That's just I would say that's a classification that some schools may use, but in the professional space, it's not a term that we ever use. But thank you all so much. I hope that this was helpful. I hope there is somewhere in your brain, there is some little story that you want to tell. What is your favorite Kidlit book? Gosh, that is a question that's too hard, but I will say the one that had a huge effect on me and really explained to me the power of seeing yourself in a story. There are two. One is Corduroy. Um, and so it was the first time I saw a little black girl in her own room going shopping with her mom, just chilling. It was the first time I ever saw it. Ecstatic about that book. And then the second one I didn't see until I was in college, and I sat down in the bookstore and I cried, and it's called Amazing Grace.
Wow.
So thank you again.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best
Leah.
with your writing.
Everybody take off your mute and let's give Leah applause such as it is, okay? So unmute yourself.
That was amazing.
Thank you so much. I thought it was great. It was wonderful. Okay. Just what we needed. Okay.
My pleasure. Enjoy residency, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Yes. Thank you, Kathleen.
You kidding? Bye everyone.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.